And did any of this, not exactly the same rituals, but did that kind of thing exist in Europe and in Britain pre modernity hitting? Was that what we would be doing as well before the separation?
No, that's always the hope and the belief that once upon a time a
Mm,
community existed, or um, we had this, but we lost it at some. I mean, many people who write about this will say, the Victorians or the people
mm,
before them had a proper way of dealing with death. They didn't. If you look at, as I've looked at 17th, 16th, 15th century diaries and letters, and you've got the same old thing. You've got it in Shakespeare, you've got it in all literature. That's why John Donne gave his sermon. He was pleading that we are parts of an island. But the reason why this system wouldn't work, when I went to the funeral of one of my dearest colleagues, Maya Fortes, professor of anthropology, and it was this enormously frustrating. I was very fond of Maya. We went to a church. Everyone was on the verge of tears, but no one could actually weep. And he was Jewish, but so it was a Jewish, sort of half Jewish. Afterwards, we went for drinks, sherry with his widow, and that was until 1 o'clock. Then I had a hurried lunch and I went off and did some seminars and lectures.
mm,
And the pain was still there, but I thought, well, why can't we take off a couple of days and have a proper. But that's one of the reasons we've never had it. There are several reasons. One is that we couldn't afford it. I mean, if you said to your employer, has working in an office or a factory, I mean, sorry, I've got a 3-day funeral ritual I've got to go to. Imagine they would say, well, maternity leave is one thing, but this is ridiculous. Capitalism, time is money. So, our busy lives.
mm.
If I said to my friends, I've arranged for a 3-day funeral at the end of, when I die, they'd say, well, Alan, sorry, but I'm afraid I can't take off 3 days just like that. So we can't afford the time.
And isn't it the case also that we're kind of brought up to suppress everything, and so, or a lot of things, and so we're expected to be. It's almost um, decent behavior not to cry, not to wail, not to show your emotions in a lot of situations, not just funerals, but everywhere. Even intense feelings are almost embarrassing, aren't they? In,
That's part of it, yes. The stiff upper lip, which is most famous in sort of upper middle class Englishmen who, and whatever happens, they just have this reserve, which is really what you're taught. I was taught very strongly at school. I mean, you're a crybaby. If someone kicks you at football, or
yeah.
you know, you something happens, you don't cry. Um, Emotion. I mean, a rather nice story is a professor of anthropology. I won't name names at Oxford, when he gave his inaugural lecture at All Souls. Um, he was a very sort of buttoned up, upper middle classish Englishman, but he started talking about the war in which he had been in the Gurkhas. He started talking about his experiences and his love of the Gurkha people, and he burst into tears. Now,
Mm.
several friends who went to it said everyone was so embarrassed. The end, they all walked out. They couldn't even go up to him and say anything because you don't do that.
Mm.
You don't show your emotion. So this buttoned up reserve, but it's basically ties in with all this separatedness, because a lot of the sociological work on modernity, like Goffman and others, show that what you have to do if you're going to keep all these spheres apart is to learn how to put on a mask
Mm.
with other people, so that um, in committee meetings, we talked about, I'm wearing this hat or that hat, I'm wearing this hat, I say this, wearing. But in our lives, we learn a mask. I often used to join and joke with my students. They said, well, why don't the English wear masks like, Italians and others in their festival? I said, we wear masks all the time.
Mm.
We are taught from childhood. I was taught it by my grandfather, by, don't by my uncle. If you lose a game, if you have a failure, don't show it. Be strong, be resolute. It's all, everywhere in our culture. And that adds to it, because you can't even, the wailing and the crying and the weeping, which you see in many funerals around the world. I mean, obviously, as you go south, in Italy, Greece, and so on, you have a certain amount of this. But the Anglo-Saxon tradition, and the other reason why it wouldn't work if you said, I'm off for 3 days, can someone take over my job, is that we don't have the rearrangement of the social structure. Basically, when a person dies, it doesn't matter.
Mm.
The cost, I mean, the advantage of individualism is that we're free. The cost is that no one cares.
Mm.
I mean, in the extreme case, if no one cares at all, you commit suicide, anomic suicide, according to Durkheim. But most people, most of their lives, if they sat back for a moment and said, who the hell would care if I died? How many people? Now, I know that actually there are a few dozen people who would care if I died, a dozen of whom would care quite a lot. But of those, probably none of my family, except possibly my Sarah's children. Even my grandchildren have grown away from me. Certainly my sisters have grown away from me, my nephews and nieces. So there are 2 or 3 family members who would care. And obviously the partner would care and take 90% of the caring. But there's no one in a job, there's no one in a few of my colleagues and younger colleagues with whom I've worked. So we came together in King's with people who had known this person. But the fact that he'd gone made not a ha'porth or not much difference to their lives. So we don't have to rearrange a social structure in the way that you do in a tribal society, because you are no longer a pivot of, you're no longer a beam in the house, part of a lineage or community or whatever. Once you get old and retire and so on, you are the person who, and that ties up with the discussion of old age. It doesn't really matter, and indeed it's a great relief when Granny dies.
Mm. Yeah.
So the idea of, as I thought I was, as an anthropologist, at one point I was contemplating setting up a proper funeral service provider. Anthropological funerals are us, where I would, get a shaman, because I know a shaman. And when I had a wedding in my garden, this shaman came and did some of his shamanic dancing and capturing and releasing of things. So it had a kind of shamanic element, and it made it a better sort of wedding. I thought of, extending this and bringing in some shamans from around the world and running but it wouldn't work because, it interferes with other things. Okay.
Yeah, brilliant. And that resonates a lot with me. I mean, South Yorkshire, where I'm from, I mean, we're very buttoned up. I mean, my mum and all that lot, they never let anyone cry, and they never cried themselves. And in fact, when my granny died, I didn't know for 4 weeks. They forgot to tell me, and things like that. And
they forgot, or they deliberately didn't tell you.
I think they deliberately did. Well, I think they didn't think I'd be all that bothered. So I think it was a mixture of, I don't suppose they forgot so much as thought it's not really all that important to me, and it's not that important really. So it's odd. It is a very odd thing, and I recognise that a lot in what you're saying. And I wonder whether there's a link between that and the earlier thing you discussed, the guilt stuff as well, where you're taught to not feel self-pity, and often crying and feeling sentimental about things. You get told, you tell yourself off, oh, you're not that important, who cares, and get on with it. That kind of, those are the kind of things that run around in your head, and I think that's part of this very Protestant legacy that we still.
Yeah, well, it's all mixed up. It's a whole jumble, because you not only feel you shouldn't show it, and you should, but you also in some ways shouldn't feel it.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
if you feel too strongly, because in a way, what I realized through my education, my socialization, is that you must learn not to feel too deeply, Alan,
Mm,
because you'll get hurt, and you if you get emotionally involved with people, then the separateness of your own identity and individuality is threatened. You must be a lone actor. You must be a Promethean figure, and you mustn't give hostages to fortune. So keep your own distance. Put a wall round you.
mm.
Um, the Englishman's castle is not only their home but their body,
Yeah.
and that mix of things.
And prepare for loss. People will leave, people will go. There's nothing binding them. It's all transitory. It's all very, um, it's very hard to get anything locked in and will hold to you. And also that's right, because you're not that important. And you're probably guilty of something. And so it all kind of fits together. It's a very
And
neat machine and hard to escape.
you're not that important, and you shouldn't put a burden.
Yeah.
I mean, quite often when I suggest things our children should do, or getting them involved, Sarah says, "No, we mustn't put any burden on them, and we mustn't feel they must do anything. So keep yourself away."